Well, good morning, Rock Church. How's everybody doing? Good? Man, packed house today. Good to see you all. Hope you're having a great morning and just a great weekend. Enjoying that fall weather. Anybody? No? You're already like, it's cold. I want it to be hot. Come on. No, beautiful morning out there. Great stuff going on. Hey, if you're at one of our campuses, I want to welcome you. Obviously, those of you who are in this auditorium want to welcome you. And especially if you're a guest with us. Man, thanks for coming. If you're new around here, we're just glad that you're here. My name's Josh, one of the pastors, and just looking forward just to sharing with you over the next 25, 30 minutes in this series about Rooted. And before I kind of jump into it, I want to kind of highlight something that Matt kind of started to mention when he was up here about the new Coastal campus and the C3 Coffee Bar. And I just want to thank you because there has just been tons of you helping and volunteering and serving. So can we give it up for everybody who's had a chance to do that? It's been huge. I mean, from the first day when we got in there to building some walls to this past weekend, some people cleaning and everything in between, seen small groups, seen individuals. One of the stories that I just have to tell for a second is about a middle school group that came to serve one night. That their coach, their leader said, hey, let's go serve. And a couple of them showed up and I was talking to him and saying, well, here's the jobs tonight. This ceiling needs to be repaired and this little area over here, this needs to be done. And then also there's a really gross job that maybe you want to do. Unfortunately, one of the businesses accidentally threw a bunch of garbage into our construction dump. The garbage had a bunch of old rotten food in it. And if you know, a construction dumpster is supposed to only be for construction stuff, so we would have got charged. So I said, dude, we need to get all those bags out and thrown in the regular dumpster. Do y'all think y'all want to do that? And he's like, yeah, I got junior high guys. Of course we want to do that. You know what I mean? It's like dumpster dive. Here we go, you know? And for those of you who are not junior high, you're thinking, no thanks. But these middle schoolers, they stepped up and they dove into this dumpster and they started cleaning it out. And it was gross, all right? Just to let you know. It was so gross that one of them puked. But not just once, not twice, not 3 times my lady, if you're as old as me, but 4 different times this kid puked. Now, I want you to think about that. Why would it take 4 different times? It meant because he kept going back to keep serving, right? And how many of y'all after one puke would be like, I'm done, right? We're like, I'm out. I love the heart that says, I'll do whatever it takes to love people and to serve people so that they can have Jesus. I love that. And that goes from whether it's some junior high guys dumpster diving, whether it's some older people who are in there sweating in the heat and the dust. I just think all across the board, people are saying, I want to do everything I can to love God. And the way that I love God is by loving people. Because honestly, by doing that work, what you're doing is you're setting up an environment where people can be loved. And what that means is when you're loving people, in reality is you're loving God. Now, I'm going to tell you a bunch of different things this morning, but it all boils down to one statement. If there's one statement that I could make this morning, one phrase that I want you just to lock onto for the whole morning, I want you to catch this. Your love for God is measured by your love for people. Your love for God is measured. It's displayed. It's put on show. It is seen by your love for people. Jesus basically said this: the measure of love you have for others is how much you actually love me. Look at this verse. It's from John chapter 13. It says, so now I'm giving you a new commandment. Now, let me stop at that word right there. He's given you a new commandment. Now, back when he was saying this, about 2,000 years ago, he's preaching to primarily a Jewish crowd that would have known all the commandments. A Jewish group that would have said, okay, the number one commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. This Jewish crowd would say, and then there's the 10 commandments that we know the 10 commandments that Moses gave us. And then they'd say, and then there's all the other commandments, up to over 600 of them listed in the Old Testament. So a Jewish person would have known there's 600 different commandments that I am supposed to follow if I love God. And then Jesus says, but now I'm going to give you a new commandment. Now you could look at that and say, well, is that Jesus saying, man, I just want to add one to the number? No, this is Jesus saying, I want to give you a whole new way of thinking. Rather than you thinking about 600 and something commandments, I want to give you one. I want to give you one. And that one commandment is to love people. Let me go back to the text. It says this. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. That's it. I mean, honestly, I could stop. We could call this message done because that's all you need to catch. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. What Jesus is saying there is the way that you love each other will give the world testimony that you love me. So in other words, if you love each other, that shows the world that you love God. So the number one thing we're supposed to do if we say we love God is to love people. So last week, if you were here in the Rooted series, I talked about being a difference maker and that you are called to love and to serve people. I said that you are empowered to love and to serve people. So today, I'm just going to add one more thing on there. You are now commanded to love and to serve people. And you might say, okay, if that's what I'm commanded to do, then that's what I want to do. Because I want to make sure that my love for God measures up. So how do I do it? Well, that's where I want to tell you 3 stories this morning. And I've got 3 little objects up here to help illustrate these stories. Now, these stories are found in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, the 25th chapter. So if you have a Bible, you can turn there. If you have a digital device, you can get it there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through Matthew chapter 25. And if you have church background, you might remember some of these stories because they're kind of some familiar stories. But a lot of times they're taught like individually, all right? And they're a great way to teach them that way. But what I want to do this morning is I want us to look at story 1, and I want us to see how story 1 is lived out by the way we walk out story 2. And I want us to look at story 2 and realize the way that we live it out and walk it out is by doing story number 3. So to do that, we gotta go back. We gotta hit story number 1. And story number 1 is this idea of I need to love God. That I want to love God. The story goes like this. This is a story that Jesus told. It's recorded in Matthew 25. And he said this. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like 10 bridesmaids who went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and didn't take enough oil with them, but 5 were wise and took enough oil, not just for their lamp, but extra in case they ran out. Well, as time went on, they became drowsy and fell asleep. And about midnight, a bell rang, a cry went out, and they started shouting, the bridegroom is coming, the bridegroom is coming. So the 10 bridesmaids all woke up. Now the 5 foolish ones looked at their lamps and realized they had ran out of oil. So they looked at the wise ones and said, give us some of your oil. And they said, well, we can't do that because we won't have enough to be ready for the groom, but go to the market and buy some for yourself. Well, while they were away buying oil, the groom came, and he invited the 5 wise bridesmaids into the wedding feast, and then he shut the door. A little bit later, the 5 foolish bridesmaids showed up, and they started knocking on the door saying, let us in, let us in. But the groom said, away from me, for I do not know you. Now, that's a tough story, and we could dig into it from a lot of different angles. But 2 different things I want you to catch this morning is, 1, that there's going to come a day that we're going to stand before God. And God is going to make a decision to either let you into heaven or to not. And I know personally, I want to make sure I get into heaven. And we would think the way that is done is by saying, well, yeah, I love God, all right? And that makes sense, and that is true. That I need to love God, that I need to be ready for his return, that maybe a way to think about it is I have allowed him to enter into my life. I have oil in my lamp, if you want to say it that way, all right? So part of the concept is just making sure that you love God and that you're ready to see him with great joy. Now, I'll tell you this, that my favorite part of weddings is when the groom gets to see the bride for the first time. Are you with me? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like there's that moment that all of a sudden the music changes and the bride kind of comes around the corner, and then all of a sudden the groom catches eyes, and all the time, this is what I see when that happens. Tears in the eyes, smile from ear to ear, right? You know, like, there's my bride. An illustration of this. This is my son who got married a few months ago. And this is the moment that he saw Katie coming around the corner, all right? And it just so happened that the photographer caught the picture. So I love the picture. It's very special to me just from a family, from a memory sake. But I also just love his face, all right? And that's the face you want everyone to have when they see their bride for the first time, right? Like you don't want some groom when he sees his bride for the first time go, that's the best you got. Right? You know, like, you don't want some bride going, well, I guess I want him to come. Now, when you think about it, as a church, we are the bride. As individuals, you are the bridesmaid to the groom. I don't want Jesus when he looks at you. I don't want Jesus when he looks at me. I don't want Jesus when he looks at our church to go, that's the best you got. No, I want him to see a bride. I want him to see the bridesmaids. And he goes, oh yeah, come into the kingdom. Because he's going to have that day for us. So we've got to make sure that we're ready for it. We got to make sure we're ready. The 5 wise ones were ready to receive, to meet Jesus. And then there was 5 that were not. I want to be ready. And my guess is that you want to be ready as well, that you want to know that, man, if there is an afterlife, if there's this thing called heaven that the Bible talks about, then I want to make sure I go that direction, then I want to make sure I spend eternity with God. So if that's the case, then I got to be ready. Well, then how do I know if I'm ready? How do I know if I truly love God? Well, that's where we got to go to the second story. To story number 2, because story number 2 helps us understand what it means to be ready to meet him. And story number 2 is all about loving God and doing something. Again, it's found in the book of Matthew, and the story goes like this. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like an owner who was going away on a long journey. And he pulled 3 of his workers to him, and he distributed his money amongst them. To one guy, he gave 5 bags of silver. To one guy, he gave 2 bags of silver. And to another guy, he gave 1 bag of silver. And he was gone for a long time. And while he was gone, the guy who had 5 bags of silver invested it and got 5 more. The guy who had 2 bags of silver, he invested it and got 2 more. And the guy who had 1 bag of silver was afraid of his boss, was afraid of the owner, so he took that bag of silver and hid it in the ground. Well, after a long time, the owner came back and he pulled the 3 servants to him and he said, what did you guys do with what I gave you? And the guy who had been given 5 bags of silver said, I took your 5 bags of silver, I invested it, and now here's 10. And the owner looked at him and said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been responsible with a little, so now I want to give you so much more. And then the guy who had 2 bags of silver, the owner looked at him and said, what did you do? And he goes, well, you gave me 2 bags, so I want to give you 2 more. I want to return to you 4 because I invested it. And the same words came out of the owner's mouth. He said, well done, my good and faithful servant. I have entrusted you with a little, and you have been faithful with it, so now I want to give you so much more. And then he got to the guy who'd been given 1 bag of silver, and he said, and what did you do with it? And he goes, well, Well, boss, I know that you work hard for your money, that you harvest crops where you don't even plant them. So I was afraid to lose it. So I took it and I hid it in the ground. But now I bring it back to you. I give it to you. Here's your bag of silver back. And the owner said some harsh words. He said, "You lazy worker. If you know that I work hard for my money, if you know that I harvest crops that I don't plant, then wouldn't it have been wise to at least take what I gave you and take it to a bank where it could draw a little bit of interest? But instead, you hid it in the ground. Now take what he has and give it to the guy who has more. And as for him, get rid of him. Take this useless worker away from me." Now, I want you to think about those words that Jesus used in this story. Lazy and useless. Not two words that you want to find on your report card, right? Not two words that you want to find on your year-end review from your boss. Two words that we don't want to ever be said about us from a boss, from a coach, from a parent. You don't want your parent to look at you and say, "You are lazy. You are useless," even worse. But the words Jesus used in this story, I think he used them on purpose to make sure that we catch that he is saying, "I've given you gifts. You need to invest them." If you were here last week, if you weren't, go catch it online. But I talked a lot about this, that God's given you a gift. And that gift can be your time. That gift can be your talents. That gift can be your resources. And he asks us to use them on his behalf, to use them to make a difference in this world. So what Jesus is doing by this story is he's saying, if you love me and want to be ready for me, then you've got to make sure you're doing something. That you can't just sit on the gifts that I've given you. If you sit on the gifts and you waste them, then the words that he'll use towards us is useless and lazy. And guys, those are not words that I want to hear. I don't want to hear those words in this world, but I especially don't want to hear them from the King of Heaven. I don't want to hear him on the day that I go to meet with him for the marriage feast. I don't want him to look at me and say useless or lazy. I want to hear the words. I desperately want to hear the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little bit. You've made a difference with your life. So come into my kingdom where I want to give you so much more." Guys, those are the words I want to hear. And those are the words that I hope that we want to hear, and I want to hear said about you, about our church, about the people that we come in contact with, that God says, "Well done." Well, how do I make sure I hear those words? You know what I'm saying? Like if I go, I want to be ready because I want to hear those words, "Well done." Well, that means I got to invest what he's given me. Well, how do I make that investment? Well, again, that's where we got to go on to story number 3. Because story number 3 is taking those two and he's saying, don't just love God and do something, but love God and do something by loving people. Last week, if you're here, I talked about how Jesus picked up a bowl and picked up a towel and he washed the feet of the disciples. What he was doing is he was loving people. And he's saying, if you want to love God, then you've got to love people. And he told this third story in Matthew 25. He said a day will come where Jesus goes and sits. It actually says the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne. And all the people of the world, all the nations will be gathered around him. And then he will separate the people like a shepherd separates the sheep. To the right, he will put the sheep, and to the left, he will put the goats. To those on his right, he will say, "Blessed are you, come into my kingdom. For when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you comforted me. When I was in prison, you visited me." And all the people will say this. They'll be like, "When did we ever do that? We don't remember doing that." And Jesus says, "Anytime you've done it to the least of these, my brothers, you've done it to me." But then he'll look to the people on his left and he'll say, "Depart from me, for I never knew you. Because when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me something to eat. When I was a stranger, you didn't invite me in. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was sick, you didn't comfort me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. And they'll say, when did we not do that? When did we not see you? And they'll say, anytime you didn't do it for somebody else, you didn't do it for me. So what Jesus is saying is, if you want to say that you love God, then you have to do it by loving people. And the way that you love people is you feed them, you give them stuff to drink, you give them stuff to eat, you clothe them, you visit them, you take care of them. And that's the reason I can go back to this statement and I can say your love for God is measured by your love for people. Because this last story is all about loving people. And Jesus said, the way that you loved people is the way that you loved me. Now, guys, there's beauty in that, but there's also danger in that. And here's what I mean. There's beauty in that, in the fact that this isn't that difficult to do. I want you to think about it. He said, if you feed somebody, then you're feeding me. If you feed somebody, you're feeding me. I think of a small group that the last Saturday of every month goes to one of our local food pantries and serves people. What that means is the fourth Saturday of every month, over 300 people come through the line. 300 different families. So that's 300 families that could represent up to over 1,000 people. And they hand out food. And the people that are doing that, you know what they're doing? They're giving food to Jesus. That's what they're doing. It might look like somebody who lives down the street, but in reality, they're giving food to Jesus. I think about some people from our church that serve at Shepherd's Table right here in town. And every time you serve at Shepherd's Table, what you're doing is serving Jesus because you're handing out food to somebody who's in need. I think about the way our church, we work with CAP, and we work with another mission partner in the Dominican called Go Ministries. And in Dominican, what we do with Go Ministries is we help establish churches and nutrition centers. And I know over 30 people from our church have been on a Dominican trip. We have another one coming up in March. I'd love for another 15 or 20 more people to go. You can go to the Connect Corner and figure out more about that. But here's one thing we do when we're in the Dominican. We serve at these nutrition centers, and you hand out a hot meal to a kid that might be the only hot meal they get that day. So when you hand out that meal, you know what you're doing? You're giving a plate of food to Jesus. When you put money in the offering plate and we send money down to make sure the nutrition centers happen year round, you're giving food to Jesus. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. All I have to do is think about Hurricane Harvey there. And you can go, well, how does that work with drink? Well, we all know Hurricane Harvey, destroyed a lot of houses, a lot of areas of Texas. And in the midst of that, what we did as soon as we found out about the need is we said, we've got to do something about this. So we take, and many of y'all know this, we take 1% of our offerings, we stick it in a fund so that when there is a natural disaster, we can help out. So we connected with a church that we have partnership with and an organization that we have partnerships with. And we sent them money, and they've done many different things with that money. But one thing they've done is they've bought a bunch of water. And they've taken it to the people who are thirsty and in need because they don't have water. When you hand out water to somebody who is thirsty, you're handing out water to Jesus. And right now we're looking at Puerto Rico going, how do we do the same thing? And we'll figure it out as a church how to connect with somebody down there and take care of them as well. Because we need to serve Jesus, and we serve and love Jesus by serving and loving people. I think about the next part of this story. Again, he said that when I was a stranger, that you invited me in. And when I think about that, I can't help but think about our 2 church plants right now that we're getting ready to launch at Coastal, and we're we're starting to prepare for a launch in Las Vegas. And I know that there are people who would say, why in the world would you go to Las Vegas? You know what I mean? Like that's like the other side of the world for us, right? And do we know anybody in Las Vegas? You see what I'm getting at? Like the people who attend our church, the Rock Church in Vegas, you're not going to know them. Chances are you might not ever meet them. But does that matter? Does it matter if we never meet the person that actually attends the same church that we attend? No. All that matters is that we're willing to go and love and serve and invite somebody in who might be a stranger so that we can love and serve Jesus and hope and make a connection with them so that they can love and serve Jesus. And guys, I'm excited to tell you, Las Vegas, they're starting their first Bible study this coming Thursday. This Thursday, there will be 5 people. Yeah, let's celebrate that. There will be 5 people this week in Vegas, or at least 5, hopefully more, but there'll be people gathering together to have a Bible study in downtown Vegas so that they can meet Jesus and be a part of our church. And we will probably never meet him on this side of heaven. But I look forward to the day that somebody comes up and says, you know what, I was part of your church, but I know we've never met. And that's going to happen because of Coastal. That's going to happen because of Vegas. And that's going to happen because of any place else that God might send us. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. You invited me to be a part of your life and what God's doing. When I was naked, you clothed me. And when I think about being naked and being clothed, I can't help but think about kids struggling around the world. I think about orphans. I think about kids who are needing to be in foster care. I think about kids who are stuck in poverty. And I think, man, they need to be clothed. They need to have shelter. They need to have the basic necessities of life. And what can we do to make a difference? I want to show you a picture that I haven't showed y'all before. That's a picture of my son. How many of y'all know my son Tate? Several of you in this room? He don't look much like that anymore, does he? But that was when Tate was found. This picture was taken the first day that he went into an orphanage. And he was 11 months old. He weighed 11 pounds. A missionary was walking through the streets of Port-au-Prince and found a little baby in a gutter with no clothes, stiff from dehydration and rigor mortis. I don't know that missionary's name. But I'm so thankful that that dude picked up that little naked boy that day. And he said, I want to serve Jesus today. And he served Jesus by putting some clothes on a little kid. He served Jesus by putting some food in that little kid's belly. He served Jesus by nursing that little kid back to health. And I just keep thinking that there's thousands of little kids like Tate who need a shirt on their back, who need food in their belly, who need water. And every time you foster a child, every time you help somebody do an adoption, every time you help people like that, what you're doing is you are serving and loving Jesus. Man, I know we got a bunch of families in our church that foster, and man, I'm so thankful for you because you are loving Jesus. And let's help them and let's help others. Because here's the reality. Your love for God is measured by your love for people. So when we do things like that, when we put clothes on people, we take care of them, we're loving Jesus. I think about the next part of the verse says, when you cared for me when I was sick. Each and every one of us knows somebody that is sick. We know somebody that needs to be comforted. Some of us work in the medical field and you're constantly working with people who are sick and need comfort. I want you to think about this. If you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, if you're in that medical field, that every time you serve somebody, you have the opportunity just to be serving Jesus. It's a beautiful thing. I think about in February, we're going to host a thing at our church called a Night to Shine, and we're going to need every one of you to help out. I don't know if you've heard about Night to Shine yet. It's part of the Tim Tebow Foundation, and what it is, it's a prom for kids and adults with special needs. And what we're going to do on that day, it's February 8th or February 9th, you'll hear more about it. We're going to get all these chairs out of this room. We're going to set up a dance floor, and we're going to get funky, all right? And I want everybody, you might say, I can't dance. Don't worry, I can't either. We're going to dance, and we're going to party, and we're going to love on some kids and adults who have special needs. And we're going to make sure they understand that they are a VIP in the kingdom of heaven. Church, are you with me? So be sure to make sure you volunteer to help out with that, whether that's helping in the parking, doing some valet parking, whether it's being part of the dance floor, whatever it might be. But here's the thing. Don't wait till February. There's people who are sick. There's people who need comforted all around us. Let's start being Jesus today. Let's start serving Jesus today. And then the last part of that verse simply said this. It said, when I was in jail, you visited me. And I can't think about that verse without thinking about what God is doing to Jay Rubin right now. I can't help but just to realize that 13 weeks ago, we started having church at Jay Rubin. 13 weeks ago. I don't even know the number, but a bunch of people in those 13 weeks have given their life to Christ. I know one volunteer who last week prayed with 4 different ladies to respond to Christ's free gift of grace. I know of 2 weeks ago that a couple people who had been residents at Jay Rubin showed up at church. And they walked through the doors, and a couple of our volunteers who serve every Sunday afternoon there saw them. And these ladies, they just started hooting and hollering. You know how you ladies do when y'all get together. You haven't seen each other for a while, you know what I mean? Like that's going on in the lobby. It's like the Holy Spirit just broke out, you know what I mean? And next thing you know, they come in and they're loving on each other and they're having a great time during service. And then 2 of them, one named Heidi, one named Ashley, they decided they wanted to get baptized. So one of those volunteers named Deb went with them, and they went into that baptistry and they got baptized. It was a beautiful moment. Beautiful moment in their lives, beautiful moment in our church. But what was so cool is at the 2 o'clock service at Jay Rubin, they showed that service. They showed the 9 o'clock hour service. And as service was happening at the end, you know how we always do baptism kind of during worship, during the response time at the end. While that's going on, they're standing, they're worshiping. All of a sudden, one of the guards says, ladies, y'all need to sit down because what you're about to experience is going to rock your world. So they all sat down, and right then, Heidi, Ashley, Deb all came out on the screen. And they watched a couple ladies who they'd been doing time with and been doing church with take that step of faith. They said there wasn't a dry eye in the jail in that room that day between residents or guards. Everybody was seeing a movement of God. And guys, I want to make sure you know this. Every weekend here at church, I meet somebody from Jay Rubin. And what I mean by that is I meet somebody who attended our Jay Rubin campus, and then they got out and they said, first place I had to be was at church. And I look forward to those introductions every week. We go to jail and we love on people because we're loving on Jesus. Now, let me wrap all this up. Let me just conclude this. If I want to love on Jesus, then I've got to love people. Because if I love people, then I'm using the gifts that he's given me. And if I'm using the gifts that he's given me to love people, then I'm ready. Then I'm ready for the day he returns. Because you might say, man, Jesus asked a whole lot of me. No, really, he asked one thing. Galatians 5:14, for the whole law can be summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus really only asked one thing of us. If we will love people, in turn, that means that we are loving God. So your love for God is measured by your love for people. So I want to challenge us all. Let's love people so that we know we're loving God. And the beauty is, like I said, it's not that hard. It's not rocket science to buy some food for somebody. It's not that difficult to see somebody who maybe is homeless and just to love on them a little bit, just to greet them, just to smile, to invite a stranger into your life, even if it's only a 2-minute conversation of just saying, hello, man, I want to give you some food, or I want to give you some toiletries, I want to give you a shirt, or I want to help you this. You know what I mean? It's a simple way, but when you do that, you're loving them, which means you're loving God. So it's not rocket science. It's something that each and every one of us can do. which then means each and every one of us can love God, which means each and every one of us can use our gifts, which means each and every one of us can be ready. Invite him into your life and then live it out by loving people. I want you to do me a favor. Let's go ahead and stand right now. And we're going to sing a couple songs and just as a time of response. And I want to invite you during this time, just respond to God the way that you feel like you need to. And that might be coming up front and taking communion and say, Jesus, thank you for clothing me. Because when you invite Jesus into your life, that means that Jesus is clothing you. So maybe by taking communion this morning and thanking him for his body and his blood, you're just saying, thank you for clothing me. Thank you for caring for me. Thank you for comforting me. Now help me to go and do likewise. Maybe this morning what you need to do is you need to say, man, I want when Jesus returns or when I go to meet him, I want for him to look at me with a smile. And that starts by you responding to his grace. And if you've never done that before in your life, then I invite you this morning to come and talk to me at the Connect Corner. It's just right back there in the back of the room while we're singing. I'll just be standing right there at that door. I would love to talk to you about the free gift of his grace. I'd love to help you say a prayer to invite Christ into your life. And then I just want to pat you on the back and encourage you as you go out to love people. So let's just spend some time responding and letting God move in this room. Why don't you pray with me? Jesus, I thank you for this morning. And Jesus, I just pray right now that we'll respond to the things we've discovered. That we will see that you call us, you empower us, and you command us to love and to serve people. So God, help us to do that. Because we all want to hear, well done. Well done. In your name, amen. Let's respond, church.